But with my, I guess it covered a lot. My sex education. It started pretty early as well. It started before high school. I remember they started discussing puberty and like the changes in girls' body when I was in grade 5, and we watched like a video. I don't know if this was grade 5 or 6, but I remember it was before high school. We watched a video called "The Miracle of Life," and this one just kind of stuck to me because it basically covers the entire process from like making from like puberty to making the baby, and then the baby coming out, you know? And I remember it was it was very interesting that they let us watch this at such an early age, but then it was also low-key so memorable because the way the baby was the childbirth part was shown was that we saw it from the perspective of a doctor. So I just remember the entire class screaming in shock because it's a woman's like vagina and a baby's coming out of it. And I remember just being like surprised by it. And that's that's what the grade school part covered. It was more on the scientific processes nga, like the changes that we may experience, which is very timely at that age because it's also the time where most of the girls in my batch were starting to experience puberty, like the beginning of puberty. And then in high school, I remember we were able to cover other topics regarding that. We were like a more comprehensive discussion of like the scientific processes of the menstrual cycle. When is like we were taught about like the cycle as well as like, oh, this is when you ovulate, this is what happens when you're ovulating, and then this is what people call the safe day. I remember the teacher telling us that, and we're all like, a what day?
Oh yeah, the
And then
safe day.
a safe day where I don't know.
What is the
Honestly,
safe day?
I honestly don't recall how you determine what the safe day is, but it's basically a day in your menstrual cycle where it's the chances of you getting fertilized, like the egg getting fertilized, is quite low. I don't really recall. I just remember it was mentioned in passing, and all of us were just like, huh. So that's we also kind of briefly learned about, because it was an all-girls school, but we also learned about puberty in boys. I remember learning about things like circumcision, what they go through in their puberty stage, and I'm just like, just like confused
Oh,
because
okay.
you were kind of young, and I wasn't really sure why I have to learn this, but I guess it was part of the science book din kasi covered it. So the teacher just kind of followed through with the textbook, and we were just kind of learning, even like the anatomical parts. I remember we also had to learn where the sperm comes from. So I remember having to memorize how the sperm is formed to when it comes out. That was more on the scientific side. And then in health classes, we learned, because that was in the science, those were science classes. Then we had health classes. In health classes, we learned more on the STIs, like we learned about AIDS and HIV. We watched films about it. They were telling us how we can get it, and like saying that, oh, you don't just get it from this, you don't just get it from sexual activities or participating in sexual activities. You can also get it from needles, things like that. They were telling us, it was more of like a way for them to tell us that this is what you can get this is a possibility that we should always keep in mind. They always remind us that you should be careful with this, and you shouldn't let this. You should be careful with your partners. I think they were just telling us mostly to be careful. And I remember, and I remember this. We also learned about gender identity and sexuality. It was quite interesting because it was a Catholic school, and we know the stance of alam niyo naman guys, yung stance ng
Yeah.
Catholic
Yeah.
regarding
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
same-sex relationships, things like that, polyamorous relationships. They have a very strict stance on that. But but our health teacher was discussing to us about gender identity, like she was telling us, and it wasn't in an insensitive way where religion keeps being brought up. I remember this specific health teacher was really good at teaching us this because it was said it was almost like she knew. She wasn't like strictly following the Catholic ideal, but she was genuinely trying to help us learn more about gender identity. Now the thing is, for me it was helpful to kind of get the gist of it, but again it was being crammed as one lesson in a quarter, so it was kind of pretty quickly taught. And I guess to me, I remember it, but I asked like some people from my high school if they do what do they remember about sex education, and they're like, I honestly don't remember much. And ayun, which is fair because even though we learned a lot, they weren't like completely in depth to some topics. Like, yeah, we learned about the sperm meeting the egg, but we didn't really learn what the act is. Like with Nathan, I think you don't really learn the actions that lead to it, and you kind of learn that outside na. Ayun.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
if more hands-on activities, that's when ma-retain mo. More than just listening.
Yeah, and I also feel like their approaches then kasi were very stiff and technical. Like for example, gender
Mhm.
identity and sexuality is a very sensitive topic because it involves your image, your self-esteem, and your like self-image. No, not self-esteem. I feel like it's more your image of yourself. It involves a lot of that, and it was taught so briefly, and she was very considerate and accommodating, my health teacher, regarding that, and she was really open to questions from my classmates regarding it. She even covered like the difference between like your gender identity and your sex. She was very distinct about that. Yeah, you're male or female anatomically, but like your gender identity is a different topic. So it was really, I don't know. But that was like later na in high school, I think grade 8 or 9. Do I think it was enough? Like I said, I think they covered a lot of the bases well, but I also feel like they could go into detail more and like discuss more of the topics, because I think being informed at a young age during our formative years is very important. Yeah.
Did you enjoy the Sixth Venus podcast? If you wish to learn more, head on over to our website called the6venus.com. Thank you for tuning in.